What if I told you the greatest empire builder in human history wasn't born in a palace, but in a tent, in the freezing cold, with enemies on every side, and food for just one day? He wasn't royalty. He had no army, no land, no allies, just one thing: the will to survive. His name was Temüjin, but the world would come to fear him as Genghis Khan, a boy raised on betrayal, exiled by his own blood, hunted like a dog in the wild. And yet he rose, not just to rule, but to shake the very bones of the earth. In this story, you'll witness the unthinkable, how an orphan forged the deadliest army the world had ever seen, how he turned broken tribes into one unstoppable force, and brought ancient kingdoms crumbling to their knees. But this story is not just war and blood. It's about a man. You'll meet Jamuka, his sworn brother, a friend, a rival, a mirror. Together they dreamed of unity, but only one would wear the crown, and the other would face him on a battlefield soaked in betrayal. You'll see how Temüjin did the impossible, uniting the violent, fractured Mongol clans, not through terror, but through justice, loyalty, and vision. He didn't just build an army. He built something new, a nation, a name, Mongol. As the story unfolds, the transformation begins. From survivor to storm, Genghis Khan creates a war machine like history has never seen. Swift, relentless, unforgiving. Cities surrendered at the sound of his name. Empires collapsed before he even arrived. But this isn't just conquest. It's personal. Soon you'll meet Borte, the queen he loved and nearly lost. Her kidnapping sparked one of his earliest wars. Their bond would shape his legacy and fracture his bloodline. You'll ride beside him through Persia, China, and Russia. Watch cities burn, watch kings fall, and still, he enforces laws more progressive than the emperors he defeated. You're about to see even the great must die. Genghis Khan's death, sudden, mysterious, still unsolved. His grave lost to time, but his shadow, it never left. We face what he left behind, a world reshaped, a name still feared, and a legacy that lives on in law, in blood, and in myth. So if you think you know Genghis Khan, think again. The truth is more brutal, more human, and far more unforgettable. Subscribe if you haven't already, and get comfortable, because this is the entire life of Genghis Khan, and it's not what you think. They didn't expect him to survive the night. The cold was brutal, the air thin and sharp. Wolves circled the camp. Inside, a woman clutched her newborn son close to her chest. She had no firewood left, no meat, no help. Her husband was gone. Her tribe was already plotting to abandon her. And her son? His name was Temüjin. He was born holding a clot of blood in his tiny fist. In Mongol superstition, that meant destiny. But destiny, like the steppe wind, is cruel. Temüjin was born around 1162, in the harshlands near the Onon River in northeastern Mongolia. But to understand his world, you have to erase everything you know about kingdoms and castles. There were no cities here, no golden thrones, no marble palaces. There were just tribes, dozens of them, each one ruled by its own chief. Each one fighting to survive in a world where winters could kill a man overnight and summer raids could wipe out his entire family. Loyalty lasted until your horse got hungry. Friendship ended at the point of a spear. Power was measured in horses, arrows, and who could make the most people afraid of him. And this world, it hated weakness. Temüjin's father, Yasujii, was a respected warrior. He belonged to the Borjigin clan, one of the noble lineages of the Mongol people. He had earned his name in war, carved his power with blood, and forced enemies to kneel. Yasujii believed his son might become a Khan someday. So he arranged a marriage for Temüjin at the age of 9, hoping to form a stronger alliance with another tribe. But that single decision would nearly destroy everything. Because on the journey home from delivering his son to live with his future wife's family, Yasuji made a mistake. He accepted hospitality from a rival tribe, concealing his identity to stay safe. But they recognized him, and they poisoned his food. Yasuji died in agony miles from his camp. And when his body was returned to his people, his tribe, the Temüjin, faced a decision. Raise his son as their new leader, or cut the dead man's family loose? They chose the second. They cast out Temüjin's mother, Holun, and her children, leaving them alone, defenseless, with no food, no allies, and no protection. A widow, 5 children, on the open steppe. Their tents were torn down, their livestock stolen. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the snow under their feet. Temüjin was only 9 years old. Temüjin and his brothers survived by digging for wild onions, catching rats, eating bark, anything that moved. They tried to kill. Some days they didn't eat at all. At night they slept in the open. No guards, no walls, just wind, wolves, and fear. And through it all, Temüjin watched. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He listened. He remembered who betrayed them. He memorized their names. And in his small, starving chest, he made a promise. One day, I will repay this. Temüjin wasn't just a survivor. He was already a fighter. One day, his older half-brother, Better, stole extra food for himself. Temüjin warned him. Sharing was the law of their little camp. Everyone ate or everyone starved. But Better didn't listen. So Temüjin took his bow, aimed carefully, and shot him, dead. His first kill. And it wasn't an enemy. It was family. That moment told us who Temüjin would become. Not a brute, not a savage, but a leader who would choose order even over blood, even if it meant spilling his own. By his teenage years, Temüjin had already made enemies. He was captured by the Temüjin, the same tribe that abandoned him. They bound him in a wooden collar, designed to humiliate. He was made to eat scraps. He couldn't run, couldn't hide. He was a prisoner. Most boys would have broken. Temüjin did not. He observed. He waited. He won the trust of a guard, then escaped into the night, still dragging the wooden collar behind him. He hid in a riverbed, ate snow, and when the time was right, he returned. Not for revenge, but for power. After escaping, Temüjin started gathering followers. Not many, just a few families, a few warriors. But they followed him, not because of his name, but because of how he treated them. He shared loot equally, promoted men based on merit, not birth. He made alliances based on loyalty, not blood. This was new. The Mongols had never seen a leader like this. And slowly, one by one, people began to whisper his name. Around this time, Temüjin reunited with his childhood friend, Jamuka. Jamuka was noble-born, charming, and just as ambitious. They made a sacred vow. They became blood brothers. They swore to fight beside each other, to protect one another. And together, they dreamed of something bigger than tribal raids. They dreamed of unification. But 2 men can't share the same crown. Not forever. At age 16, Temüjin returned to the Angjarat tribe, the one his father had arranged his marriage with years ago. There, he claimed his bride, Borte. She wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his anchor. She came with a dowry of a black sable coat, something that would soon become a powerful bargaining chip. But the happiness wouldn't last. Not on the steppe. Shortly after their marriage, Temüjin's camp was attacked by the Merkits, another rival tribe. They kidnapped Borte. For Temüjin, this wasn't just an insult. It was an act of war. He needed help. So he rode to Jamuka, and together with another ally, Togrul, the powerful Khan of the Karate tribe, they launched a rescue. Borte was recovered, but she returned changed. She was pregnant. To this day, historians debate whether the child, Joki, was Temüjin's or not. But Temüjin never questioned it. He raised Joki as his own, because for him, loyalty was more powerful than biology. Temüjin offered the coat to Togrul, securing his loyalty. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol. I give you something valuable. You owe me loyalty in return. He was playing politics at a level Mongol tribes rarely saw. And as his influence grew, so did the whispers. Some called him a visionary. Others called him a threat. The tribes had lived in chaos for generations. But Temüjin? He wanted order. By his 20s, Temüjin was no longer a hungry boy with nothing. He had allies, followers, a cause. But unity? That would come at a price. Because Jamuka, his blood brother, was also building power. And the old tribal elites? They preferred Jamuka's way. Noble blood, status, control. Temüjin offered something different. A new way, where loyalty mattered more than lineage. Where even a blacksmith's son could become a general. It was dangerous. It was revolutionary. And it would soon lead to war. The boy who once starved in the snow was about to challenge everything the Mongol world believed in. Friend would turn against friend. Brother against brother. The unification of the steppe had begun. But it would be written in blood. They called them brothers. Temüjin and Jamuka, two boys who once shared dried meat on riverbanks, who tied their horses together and swore eternal loyalty. And a Mongol word meaning more than friend. It meant bond, blood. It meant, if you die, I die too. And for a time, they believed it. But dreams don't last long on the steppe. Not when there's a crown at stake. Temüjin had grown strong. Too strong. He was no longer just a survivor with a wooden collar. No longer just the outcast boy who'd been left to die. Now he had warriors. He had families loyal to him. He had vision. A dangerous thing for a man not born noble. Because in the Mongol world, power belonged to the old bloodlines. Men like Jamuka, whose grandfather had ruled. Jamuka, who was charming, proud, and born to lead. The tribes liked him. They understood him. He didn't challenge the old way. Temüjin did. Temüjin believed anyone could rise, that a herder could become a general, that the poor could command the powerful if they proved themselves. It was heresy, but it was working. Temüjin's camps were growing. His laws were fair. His warriors were loyal, not out of fear, but out of respect. And in 1186, his supporters did something bold. They named him Khan. Not of all Mongolia, not yet, but of his own people, his own tribe. It was a declaration of intent. And to Jamuka, it was a knife in the back. Jamuka responded the only way a steppe warlord could. He raised an army, not just any army, an army backed by the noble families, the elites, the bloodlines that ruled Mongolia for generations. Jamuka's force numbered over 30,000 warriors. Temüjin had barely half that, but his men were different. They weren't bound by tradition. They weren't tied to noble clans. They fought for something bigger, a future where leadership was earned, not inherited. The two armies met near the Onon River in the region of Dalan Baljit. It was 1187. Temüjin had never fought a battle this large. His heart beat like a drum. His men, young and hungry, looked to him not as a chief, but as their chosen leader. They wore no noble sigils, just leather, steel, and purpose. Jamuka's forces? They came with banners, drums, horses sleek with wealth. For a day, the battle raged. Temüjin's tactics were clever, his cavalry fast, his formations unpredictable. But Jamuka had the numbers, and in the end, numbers matter. Temüjin lost. It was his first major defeat. Hundreds of his men were captured, and what Jamuka did next would leave a scar across Temüjin's soul. He didn't just execute the prisoners. He boiled them alive, 70 young men, one by one. Their screams echoed across the steppe for days. It was no longer just war. It was personal. Temüjin fled, but not in shame, because even in defeat, something remarkable happened. His people stayed. They could have left him, gone back to their tribes, saved themselves, but they didn't. They followed him into exile because he didn't promise them riches. He promised them fairness, justice, a future. That kind of loyalty, you can't buy it. You have to earn it. In the years that followed, Temüjin rebuilt. He didn't just gather warriors. He rewrote the way Mongols lived. He organized his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000 called Arbans, Zuns, and Tumuns. It didn't matter who your father was. If you were brave, you rose. If you were loyal, you led. Temüjin also banned raiding within his territories. He punished betrayal harshly, but always with law, not whim. He even created a code, the Yasa, a set of rules for all Mongols, rich or poor. Obey the law, respect women, never steal from your own people. Radical, for a land where might made right. Meanwhile, Jamuka faded. He had won the battle, but lost the hearts. He ruled through fear. Temüjin ruled through vision. The tribes began to notice. Some switched sides. Others watched, waiting to see who would rise. And then came Temüjin's chance. In 1201, the old tribal chiefs tried something desperate. They formed a coalition, a council of rival khans, each one jealous of Temüjin's power. They elected a puppet, the Gur Khan, a title stolen from ancient Central Asian rulers. But Temüjin wasn't intimidated. He saw through their plan. One by one, he turned their allies against them. He offered fair treatment to defectors, protection to the weak, rewards to the loyal. When the coalition marched against him, he met them with precision. His army moved like water, fast, fluid, deadly. And this time, Temüjin won. The turning point had come. After the victory, his troops captured many of Jamuka's warriors. And now, Temüjin faced a choice: revenge or restraint. He spared most of them, but not all. One man had betrayed him deeply. He was executed not in cruelty, but in justice. No boiling, no screams. Temüjin's message was clear: there is law now, even in war. Jamuka fled again, alone. He wandered the steppe, hiding from the man he once called brother. But in 1206, he was captured by Temüjin's men. They brought him forward, bound in chains. The reunion was quiet. Two old friends, two former blood brothers. They looked into each other's eyes. No one spoke. After a long pause, Jamuka did something unexpected. He refused forgiveness. He didn't beg, didn't plead for life. He said, "There can only be one sun in the sky," and with honor he accepted his fate. Temüjin had him executed quickly, without torture, without humiliation, a mercy, the last act of love between blood brothers who became enemies. Now, there was no one left to challenge him. In the spring of 1206, the great Mongol tribes met on the banks of the Onon River. They came from all corners of the steppe, the Merkit, Naiman, Karait, and more, and in a grand ceremony, they did the unthinkable. They declared Temüjin, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. It wasn't just a title, it was a revolution. For the first time in Mongol history, the steppe was united. Not by bloodline, not by fear, but by law, loyalty, and vision. Genghis Khan created a new identity, not just Borjigin, not just one tribe, but Mongol, one people, one army, one leader. And he didn't stop there. He set up a pony express system for communication across his lands. He appointed loyal generals not based on family but skill. Men like Subutai and Jebe, former enemies turned into legends. He gave religious freedom to all, encouraged trade, protected envoys. To his people, he was just. To his enemies, he was death on horseback. But he hadn't yet faced the world. China, Persia, the Islamic caliphates, the Rus, they had no idea what was coming. The boy who was left to die in the snow was now the ruler of the largest army the world had ever seen. The brothers were gone, the rivals defeated, the tribes were won, and Genghis Khan had only just begun. The steppe never gave second chances. But Temüjin wasn't asking for one. He wasn't looking to survive anymore. He was ready to conquer. For years, Temüjin had been hunted, exiled, and humiliated. He had lost family, friends, and a brotherhood that once meant everything. But now, something inside him had hardened. The boy who once ate roots to survive had become a man who could command warriors. Not through fear, not yet, but through something more rare, loyalty. That's what made him dangerous. Because unlike other tribal lords, Temüjin wasn't just chasing power. He was building something. Not a clan, not a warband, a vision. "We do not steal wives," he told them. "We do not betray blood. We follow one law, his law." He didn't start with armies. He started with the broken, runaway slaves, outcasts, men with no name, just rage in their chests and nowhere to put it. Temüjin gave them structure. He offered them something no other Mongol leader could, a future. He divided his small force into units of 10, each one accountable to the other. No more favoritism, no more tribal privilege. Whether you were noble or nothing, if you could ride, fight, and obey, you earned your place. It wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. And in the chaos of the steppe, where betrayal was tradition, Temüjin was writing a new rulebook. This new code had a name, the Yasa, a living law, built not in courts, but in blood, over fire, and through battle. But vision alone doesn't unite a people. Temüjin needed allies, and to the west, there was one man powerful enough to change the game. Genghis Khan, the Khan of the Kharat, a warlord, and once his father's sworn blood brother. Temüjin rode to him humbly, not as a rival but as a son returning home. And Genghis Khan accepted him. For now, he gave Temüjin warriors, status, a political marriage. Together, they crushed their mutual enemies, the Merkits, the Tatars. The victories stacked up like bones. For the first time in his life, Temüjin wasn't fighting just to survive. He was fighting to lead. But on the steppe, trust dies fast. And Genghis Khan, perhaps threatened, perhaps betrayed, soon turned on him. Temüjin barely escaped with his life. Once again, the man who built alliances was betrayed by one. Temüjin's camp was raided, his forces scattered, his wife, Borte, taken once again. But this time, he did not vanish. This time, he came back with an army. With every defeat, his followers grew more devoted. Why? Because he shared the pain. He bled beside them. He punished treachery ruthlessly, but rewarded loyalty like gold. And most of all, he had one symbol they could rally behind, a gray wolf on a black banner. The wolf, the spirit of the steppe. Loyal, fierce, untamed. Temüjin didn't just want to lead men. He wanted to make them brothers. He abandoned old bloodlines, old tribal loyalties. Instead, he created a new kind of allegiance based on merit, not name, that shook the steppe to its core. By 1204, Temüjin had done what no other Mongol had. He had united most of the Mongol tribes under one vision. The fractured steppe, once filled with petty lords and endless revenge, was now beating to one war drum. But there was still one man who refused to kneel, his oldest friend, his blood brother, his mirror, Jamuka. Once they had sworn to ride together. Now they stood at opposite ends of the steppe with armies behind them. Temüjin had the people. Jamuka had the nobles. When their armies met, it wasn't just a battle. It was a civil war for the soul of Mongolia. Temüjin won, brilliantly, decisively, but he made a choice that stunned the world. He let Jamuka live. For a time. According to legend, Jamuka told him, "There can be only one sun in the sky. Kill me." And so Temüjin did, but not in anger, in honor. The brotherhood was broken, but the future was clear. In 1206, the steppe gathered, not in war but in unity. Temüjin was no longer just a war chief. He was something new, Genghis Khan, not a name, a title, meaning universal ruler. He had done the impossible, from starvation to supremacy. The tribes that had once tried to erase him now chanted his name. He wore no gold, no crown, But he held something far more powerful, the complete loyalty of a nation born from ashes. The Mongol identity was no longer a geography, it was a destiny. But unity was just the beginning, because the steppe couldn't contain him, and neither could the world. Now the wolf had teeth, and the world would soon feel the bite. First China, then Persia, then everything in between. Genghis Khan was done surviving. He was ready to conquer. By 1206, the wolf had claimed his mountain. But Genghis Khan wasn't content with unity. He wanted destiny, and destiny required fire. He had forged a nation from chaos. Now he would unleash it on the world. The Mongol tribes, once scattered, bitter, divided, were now an engine of war. Temüjin, now Genghis Khan, stood at its helm. He didn't wear gold. He didn't sit on a throne. He sat in a saddle leading from the front. His first targets, the ancient enemies to the south, the Tangut kingdom of Xia and the Jin dynasty beyond it. These weren't just border raids, they were warnings to the world, and the world didn't listen. Genghis didn't just march, he calculated. His army wasn't large by the standards of great empires, but it was faster, smarter, crueler. He trained his men to ride for days without stopping, sleeping in the saddle, eating horse blood and curd. Every warrior carried multiple bows and knew how to fix them mid-battle. Signals were given with flags, smoke, or bone horns. He wasn't just building an army, he was perfecting a machine, and it had no brakes. The Mongols believed in attacking with overwhelming fear before overwhelming force. A scout would ride into a town, offer surrender. If they opened the gates, they were spared. Mostly, if they resisted, the gates burned, the rivers ran red. The name Genghis Khan became a curse whispered by children in their sleep. But it wasn't mindless brutality. It was strategy. Survivors were always left alive, wounded, broken, terrified, sent to warn the next city what was coming. And most of the time, that was enough. In Xia, they fell quickly. The Tangut king bent the knee. But the Jin dynasty, they didn't kneel. They mocked him, called the Mongols savages on ponies. So he answered, in blood. In 1215, the Mongols surrounded Zhongdu, the heart of the Jin dynasty. A walled city of stone and silk, it had stood for generations. Now it stood alone. The Mongols built siege engines, catapults, and towers, using engineers captured from other cities. They cut off the water. They blocked all food. Inside, citizens starved. Some resorted to eating leather, rats, even their dead. Outside, Genghis waited, silent, patient, unforgiving. After months, the gates fell. The Mongols poured in, and the city bled. The lesson was brutal and unforgettable. From China to Central Asia, leaders now faced a choice: bow before the wolf or feed his army. But Genghis Khan wasn't done. His eyes turned west, to the Khwarezmian Empire, a rich, ancient land spanning Persia, Uzbekistan, and beyond. They were powerful, educated, civilized, but they made one mistake. They killed his trade envoy. Genghis warned them. They ignored him. So he came, and he didn't bring merchants. The Khwarezm campaign wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. The Mongols crossed deserts once thought impassable. They outmaneuvered armies 5 times their size. They stormed city after city. In Bokhara, Genghis walked into the mosque and addressed the survivors directly. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." Then a fire, then silence. In Samarkand, the defenders numbered 100,000. The Mongols beat them with half that. How? Deception, speed, merciless coordination, and the fact that no one had ever fought an enemy like this. They were there before you expected, gone before you could regroup, and returned before you rebuilt. But here's the paradox. For every massacre, there was also law. Genghis Khan enforced a brutal but effective system. No theft, no kidnapping, no lying to your commander, and no privilege, not even for nobles. He created trade routes across Asia. He made roads safe again, for merchants, pilgrims, even scholars. His empire protected religious freedom, even poetry. He burned cities but built an order. Genghis Khan wasn't just erasing the map. He was redrawing it, and beneath his banner order was born from the ashes. Firecracker cliffhanger into Chapter 5. The Khan and the Queen, but even storms have eyes, and even emperors have hearts. As the world burned, Genghis Khan's thoughts drifted to one person, Borte, his queen, his constant, his only. But the blood that built an empire would soon threaten the family that held it together. Up next, the Khan and the Queen, betrayal, bloodlines, and the scandal that shook the Golden Tent. By 1206, the wolf had claimed his mountain. But Genghis Khan wasn't content with unity. He wanted destiny, and destiny required fire. He had forged a nation from chaos. Now he would unleash it on the world. The Mongol tribes, once scattered, bitter, divided, were now an engine of war. Temüjin, now Genghis Khan, stood at its helm. He didn't wear gold. He didn't sit on a throne. He sat in a saddle leading from the front. His first targets? The ancient enemies to the south, the Tangut kingdom of Xia and the Jin dynasty beyond it. These weren't just border raids. They were warnings to the world. And the world didn't listen. Genghis didn't just march. He calculated. His army wasn't large by the standards of great empires, but it was faster, smarter, crueler. He trained his men to ride for days without stopping, sleeping in the saddle, eating horse blood and curd. Every warrior carried multiple bows and knew how to fix them mid-battle. Signals were given with flags, smoke, or bone horns. He wasn't just building an army. He was perfecting a machine, and it had no brakes. The Mongols believed in attacking with overwhelming fear before overwhelming force. A scout would ride into a town, offer surrender. If they opened the gates, they were spared. Mostly, if they resisted, the gates burned. The rivers ran red. The name Genghis Khan became a curse whispered by children in their sleep. But it wasn't mindless brutality. It was strategy. Survivors were always left alive. Wounded, broken, terrified, sent to warn the next city what was coming. And most of the time, that was enough. In Xia, they fell quickly. The Tangut king bent the knee. But the Jin dynasty, they didn't kneel. They mocked him, called the Mongols savages on ponies. So he answered, in blood. In 1215, the Mongols surrounded Zhongdu, the heart of the Jin dynasty. A walled city of stone and silk. It had stood for generations. Now it stood alone. The Mongols built siege engines, catapults, and towers, using engineers captured from other cities. They cut off the water. They blocked all food. Inside, citizens starved. Some resorted to eating leather, rats, even their dead. Outside, Genghis waited, silent, patient, unforgiving. After months, the gates fell. The Mongols poured in, and the city bled. The lesson was brutal and unforgettable. From China to Central Asia, leaders now faced a choice: bow before the wolf or feed his army. But Genghis Khan wasn't done. His eyes turned west, to the Khwarezmian Empire, a rich, ancient land spanning Persia, Uzbekistan, and beyond. They were powerful, educated, civilized, but they made one mistake. They killed his trade envoy. Genghis warned them. They ignored him. So he came, and he didn't bring merchants. The Khwarezm campaign wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. The Mongols crossed deserts once thought impassable. They outmaneuvered armies 5 times their size. They stormed city after city. In Bokhara, Genghis walked into the mosque and addressed the survivors directly. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." Then a fire, then silence. In Samarkand, the defenders numbered 100,000. The Mongols beat them with half that. How? Deception, speed, merciless coordination, and the fact that no one had ever fought an enemy like this. They were there before you expected, gone before you could regroup, and returned before you rebuilt. But here's the paradox. For every massacre, there was also law. Genghis Khan enforced a brutal but effective system. No theft, no kidnapping, no lying to your commander, and no privilege, not even for nobles. He created trade routes across Asia. He made roads safe again, for merchants, pilgrims, even scholars. His empire protected religious freedom, even poetry. He burned cities but built an order. Genghis Khan wasn't just erasing the map. He was redrawing it, and beneath his banner order was born from the ashes. Firecracker cliffhanger into Chapter 5. The Khan and the Queen, but even storms have eyes, and even emperors have hearts. As the world burned, Genghis Khan's thoughts drifted to one person, Borte, his queen, his constant, his only. But the blood that built an empire would soon threaten the family that held it together. Up next, the Khan and the Queen, betrayal, bloodlines, and the scandal that shook the Golden Tent. The world didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming. Not a rebellion, not a campaign, not even a war. What Genghis Khan would unleash on Central Asia was annihilation, and it all began with a simple gesture of peace. A merchant caravan carrying goods and trust, crossing into the Khwarezmian Empire. But in that empire, trust was weakness, and peace, a fool's bargain. What they did to those messengers, history still flinches to remember, because when Genghis Khan was betrayed, he didn't just retaliate. He erased. In 1218, the Mongol Empire stretched farther than anyone could have imagined just a decade earlier. From the frozen rivers of the north to the arid deserts of the Gobi, Temüjin, now Genghis Khan, had become a name that whispered through kingdoms like smoke. But conquest wasn't his only language. Genghis had begun to trade. Silk from China, jade, horses, spices, salt. He understood that after war came order, and trade was the currency of peace. So, when he turned westward to the prosperous Khwarezmian Empire, he did not send soldiers. He sent merchants, 95 men, loaded with rare goods, protected by his seal. Their destination, the border city of Otrar. Their purpose, peace. But the governor of Otrar had other plans. His name was Inalchuq, ambitious, paranoid, cruel. He looked at the Mongol caravan and saw not diplomats, but spies. And so he did what cowards always do. He seized them, stripped them, tortured them, and then he had them executed. Every last one. The goods were stolen. Their heads were sent to his court. Their bodies were left to rot in the desert sun. News of the massacre reached Genghis Khan weeks later. He did not rage. He did not shout. He simply sent another message. 3 men this time, a formal diplomatic envoy. By the customs of the steppe and the Muslim world, they were untouchable. The message was clear. Your governor murdered my men. I ask for justice, not war. Surrender him, and there will be peace. It was a test, a chance. Sultan Muhammad II, the ruler of Khwarezm, had a choice. He could honor the messenger, punish the governor, keep the peace. But pride has ended more empires than swords ever could. Sultan Muhammad saw the Mongols as distant barbarians, uncivilized, inferior. What were they compared to the grandeur of Khwarezm? He had cities like Samarkand and Bokhara, centers of learning, trade, and religion. Why bow to a man from the steppe, So he made a decision that history would never forgive. He had one of the Mongol ambassadors beheaded, and the other two. He shaved their beards, a humiliation worse than death among Mongols, and sent them back alive. With that act, the Sultan didn't just insult a Khan. He declared war on everything Genghis Khan had built. He spat on Mongol law. He slaughtered Mongol subjects. He humiliated Mongol blood. And now he would learn what that meant. Genghis Khan summoned his war council. The greatest minds and warriors of the Mongol world gathered under open skies. He told them the story, told them what had been done. Then he paused and asked only one question: what is the penalty for spilling Mongol blood? The answer came from every corner of the camp: death. But Genghis had no interest in death alone. He wanted the Sultan to feel what the merchants had felt: powerless, trapped, afraid. This was not just punishment. It would be example. He began preparing the greatest military expedition of his life. Not north to the Jin dynasty, not east to the Tanguts, but west toward Persia, toward the cities of silk, towers, and mosques, toward fire. His army would be a hammer in the shape of lightning. More than 100,000 men, divided into perfect units. Each soldier trained to ride, shoot, and kill as one mind. Supply trains moved like cities. Scout units ranged weeks ahead. Every village they passed was spared if it bowed. If not, it vanished. Genghis Khan was not marching to conquer. He was marching to punish the soul of a civilization. And so it began. The storm that would roll across Central Asia, not for land, not for loot, but for justice. What started as a murdered caravan would end with entire cities erased from maps, cultures undone, skies choked with smoke. And as the hooves thundered westward, the world had no idea. Genghis Khan wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to erase. What happens when the most efficient war machine in history is unleashed not for conquest, but revenge? In the next part, the Mongols strike, and what they do in Otrar will haunt history forever. The moment the second envoy returned, humiliated, half-shaven, and burning with shame, Genghis Khan went silent. No words, no fury, just the tightening of his jaw, the long, deep stare across the endless grasslands. Then he stood, and the order echoed across the steppe: prepare the horses. This was not going to be a campaign. It was going to be a message, written in fire, blood, and ash. The world would soon understand what it meant to spill Mongol blood. Genghis summoned his sons, his generals, his most trusted commanders, Jib, Subutai, and Kublai of the Uryankai. All of them gathered beneath the great black banner of the Mongols. The wolf-teeth edges whipped in the wind, snapping like the jaws of a beast that had finally been unleashed. He told them what had happened, what the Khwarezmian governor had done, what the Sultan had allowed, what it meant, and what had to be done next. There was no debate, no strategy session, only vengeance. By spring of 1219, the Mongol horde began to move west, more than 100,000 strong. It wasn't just the size of the force that terrified the world. It was the speed, the silence, the calculation. Each division moved like clockwork. Their supplies were mobile, their scouts were ghosts, and their fury was precise. This was the birth of the modern campaign, a war designed not only to win, but to crush the very idea of resistance. Their first target, Otrar, the city where it all began, where Governor Inalchuk had murdered Genghis Khan's merchants, the site of the original sin. Otrar sat on the edge of the Khwarezmian Empire, a powerful trade hub surrounded by thick walls and strong towers. Its defenders believed they could hold. They had food, fortifications, time. What they didn't have was mercy. When the Mongols arrived, they surrounded the city like a tightening noose. The siege began. Week after week, they hammered the walls, battering rams, catapults, mining tunnels beneath the towers. But Genghis Khan didn't just rely on brute force. He used psychology. He offered surrender, promised safety. If the city opened its gates, no blood would be spilled. But if it didn't, He made it clear there would be no walls high enough to save them. Still, Otra resisted, and so the siege tightened. For 5 long months, the Mongols choked the life from the city. Water ran dry, food dwindled, disease spread. Finally, a gate was opened, not by surrender, but by betrayal. A commander inside the walls flipped sides, and the Mongols surged in. The city fell, but that wasn't the end. Genghis Khan ordered his generals to bring Inalchuq, the governor who started it all, to him alive. And what followed has echoed through history as one of the most brutal acts of calculated vengeance ever recorded. They brought Inalchuq in chains. No crown, no robes, just a man now stripped of title and power. He was given no chance to speak, no trial, no defense. The punishment was already decided. According to some chroniclers, Genghis Khan had molten silver poured into the governor's eyes and ears, a symbolic justice. He had been blind to honor, deaf to peace. Now both would be taken from him. And then he died, not just as a man, but as a symbol of what happens when you betray the Mongol Khan. But the wrath did not stop at Otra. This wasn't about one city. This was about making an example of the entire Khwarezmian Empire. And Genghis Khan wasn't done teaching. The Mongols now split their forces. Subutai and Jebe were sent on long flanking maneuvers, sweeping far west and south, looping behind enemy lines to sow chaos. Another force moved on Bokhara, and Genghis himself led the siege of Samarkand, the shining jewel of the Khwarezmian Empire. But first, Bokhara. Bokhara was no simple outpost. It was a center of Islamic culture, education, and trade. Its libraries were famous, its mosques enormous, the scholars proud. But when the Mongols arrived, none of that mattered. Genghis Khan didn't approach Bokhara as a barbarian. He approached it as a message. He entered the city on horseback through a broken wall, not the gate. And when the people were rounded into the main mosque, he stood before them and said, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." The words chilled history, because he didn't just see himself as a conqueror. He saw himself as divine justice. The city was looted, the fortresses destroyed, thousands were executed, the scholars were silenced, and Bokhara, once proud, was reduced to rubble and ashes. But the wrath still burned. Next came Samarkand, and this time the Sultan himself was nearby. But he did not ride to defend the city. He fled. Samarkand tried to resist. They had walls, warriors, even trained war elephants. But the Mongols came prepared. They dug trenches, set traps. They released flaming arrows. They collapsed gates. And when the walls fell, the punishment began. Tens of thousands were killed. The Mongols took prisoners, then executed them in waves, forcing their comrades to watch. Engineers were spared, artisans taken, the rest removed from the world. Samarkand, like Bokhara, was wiped off the earth not just physically but spiritually. Its pride was broken, its people scattered, its legacy burned. And the Sultan? He was running, from city to city, fortress to fortress. Each time, he left his generals behind to die in his place. He crossed rivers, climbed mountains, dressed in disguise, and still Genghis Khan hunted him, not just with armies but with ghosts. Subutai and Jebe chased him across the known world, over snow-capped ranges, across parched deserts. The Sultan tried to regroup, to plan, to beg, but no one trusted him now, not after the slaughter, not after the cowardice. He finally died on an island in the Caspian Sea, sick, alone, disgraced. The Mongols found his body too late, but Genghis Khan was satisfied, because the world had seen, and the lesson was clear. This wasn't just war. This was the collapse of an empire. The Khwarezmian realm, once wealthy, proud, and powerful, had been wiped from the map in under 2 years. The cities broken, his people scattered, the Sultan dead, and Genghis Khan, he returned to the steppe without a scratch. Not just a conqueror, but a symbol, a god of war, a name that made entire cities surrender without a fight. The wrath of the Khan had been delivered. The sun rose over Bokhara like it had for centuries, warm and golden, bathing the domes of the mosques in honeyed light. Merchants opened stalls in the bazaars. Children fetched water from ancient wells. Scholars in long robes shuffled into madrasas, scrolls clutched under their arms. But that morning, the air carried something else. Dust, distant thunder, and then rumors, whispers. A name passed from breath to breath. The Mongols are coming. First, no one believed it. How could they? Bokhara was a jewel of the Khwarezmian Empire, a city of books, culture, faith, and stone. Its walls were tall, its gates guarded, its people devout. Surely no horseman could breach Bokhara, but soon the sky turned dark with smoke, and the ground began to tremble. Sultan Muhammad had fled. After the fall of Otrar, after Samarkand's defenses cracked and scattered, he disappeared, running from one stronghold to the next, leaving his cities to fend for themselves. Now Bokhara stood alone. The city's defenders were poorly coordinated. Some were volunteers with rusty spears, others mercenaries without loyalty, waiting to see who paid more. A few local officials barked orders from the towers, confident that God and stone walls would protect them. But stone had never met Genghis Khan. What no one in Bokhara knew, what no city ever truly grasped in time, was that Genghis Khan didn't attack cities the way others did. He didn't surround and starve. He didn't rush and bleed. He outthought. He outmaneuvered. He broke their spirit before touching their walls. As he approached Bokhara, he split his army into smaller units, feinting north, east, west, creating the illusion of uncertainty. While the defenders scrambled to prepare, Genghis quietly sent a strike force around the city. They captured the irrigation systems, the aqueducts, the wells. Before the siege even began, Bokhara was dying of thirst. The people were terrified, but the officials issued proclamations. Hold the walls. Help is coming. They lied. No help was coming. And then it happened, something Bokhara had never expected. The city gates opened. From the inside, a group of Persian engineers, pressed into service by the Mongols, led a detachment through a forgotten sally port. They opened the way, and the storm poured in. The Mongols didn't just breach the city, they devoured it. They moved like smoke and lightning, disorienting, everywhere, unstoppable. No mercy, no hesitation, just calculated fury. Within hours, the defenders broke. Some ran, some begged, some tried to surrender mid-fight. It made no difference. The last defenders fled to the Ark, the ancient citadel at the heart of Bokhara. Thick walls, high towers, a final refuge. But refuge had no meaning now. Genghis himself led the final assault. He had watched from a nearby ridge, expression unreadable, as Bokhara burned. Now he rode through its broken gates, not as a general, as a reckoning. The man who had once begged for scraps beneath enemy fires now entered palaces to the sound of screaming. What Genghis Khan did next became legend. He gathered the city's survivors, scholars, clerics, merchants, and children, and forced them into the central mosque, place meant for peace. He stood atop the pulpit, where imams had once delivered sermons. And he spoke. "I am the punishment of God," he said. "Had you not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Not rage, not glory, just fact." Bokhara had betrayed no one, but it belonged to the empire that had. And now it was an example. The city was plundered methodically. Skilled artisans were separated from the masses. They were spared not out of mercy, but because they were useful. They'd be sent east to build for the Khan. The rest? Slaughtered, burned, buried in shallow pits, forgotten. The mosques and libraries were looted, the bazaars torn apart, water sources poisoned. Bokhara had been one of the pearls of Islam. Now it was ash. To Genghis, this wasn't cruelty. It was communication, a clear message sent across the silk roads and mountain passes. Defiance will be met not with conquest, but extinction. Bokhara wasn't destroyed randomly. It was chosen because it was proud, wealthy, and symbolic. He wanted the world to see what happened when you humiliated a Mongol envoy. He wanted every city that dared to resist to hear the silence where Bokhara once stood. The sky was black with vultures. The river ran thick and red. We forgot the names of our gods. And so the siege ended. But the campaign was just beginning, because beyond Bokhara stood a city far grander, a place of scholars, warriors, and holy men. Samarkand. They said Samarkand could not fall. Genghis Khan would prove them wrong, brick by brick, bone by bone. If Bokhara was a warning, then Samarkand was the reckoning. The fires of Bokhara were still smoldering when Genghis Khan turned his gaze east, to the pride of the Khwarezmian Empire, Samarkand, a city of ancient silk roads and blue-tiled mosques, a place of poets, scholars, and kings. But it was also the beating heart of Sultan Muhammad's power, the crown jewel of his domain. And now it stood in the path of the storm. Samarkand was no outpost. Its walls were thick. Its towers bristled with archers. Inside, tens of thousands of warriors, Turks, Persians, Arabs, mercenaries, waited, confident in their strength. The city's rulers believed they could outlast the Mongols. Why shouldn't they? They had fortifications, food, and numbers. What they didn't have was unity. While Genghis Khan's armies moved like a single organism, the defenders of Samarkand squabbled. The local elites distrusted the soldiers. The soldiers hated their commanders. And no one respected Sultan Muhammad, the man who had abandoned them to save his own skin. The horizon blackened again. Horsemen by the tens of thousands poured toward the city. Not in chaos, not in desperation, in formation. Each Mongol knew his role, from the lowest archer to the highest general. They surrounded Samarkand with terrifying speed, cutting off escape, water, and hope. Genghis didn't rush. He studied, waited. Then he ordered his men to begin the siege, not with siege towers, but with terror. The Mongols drove captured prisoners, those taken from Otrar and Bokhara, to the front lines. They forced them to carry heavy logs and rocks to build ramps. They had no armor, no weapons, just terrified eyes and shaking hands. "Let your own people break your walls," the Mongols seemed to say. When the citizens of Samarkand looked over their ramparts, they saw neighbors, friends, being crushed under boulders or cut down by arrows if they stumbled. It broke something in them. Day by day, Mongol siege weapons hammered the walls. Ballistas and catapults, copied from Chinese designs, launched boulders, firepots, and even rotting corpses into the city. Disease began to spread. So did despair. When the gates finally broke, the real horror began. Before the Mongols could even storm the streets, part of the garrison surrendered. They opened the inner gates in the night, hoping for mercy. They thought, perhaps, Genghis would spare them. But mercy was never guaranteed. Not now. Not after Otrar. Not after the messengers. Genghis took what he valued: blacksmiths, stonemasons, scribes, engineers. Thousands were marked for forced relocation to Mongolia, China, or further west. The rest? Rounded up, catalogued. Some were executed, some enslaved. All were broken. The mosques were looted, palaces burned, libraries ransacked, and then, like always, silence. The Mongols didn't linger. They took what they needed and left nothing they didn't. Samarkand was erased. Not in stone, the buildings remained, but in pride, in memory, in identity. The people who once called it the center of the world now called it what was left. Among those taken was a man named Ala al-Din Adamalik Javani, a scribe whose descendants would later write the history of the Mongols. He watched as the city fell. He watched as soldiers slit throats and counted heads. He watched as his friends vanished into foreign lands. And he would never forget. While Samarkand screamed, Sultan Muhammad ran. He fled into the mountains, abandoning his armies, abandoning his people, abandoning his empire. He disguised himself, changed his name, tried to blend into the crowds of refugees. But the Mongols had already sent scouts, not to fight, to find him, to chase him, track him, erase him. One Mongol general, Subutai, was given a simple order: follow the Sultan to the edge of the world. And so he did. With Bokhara and Samarkand gone, the Khwarezmian Empire began to collapse. Cities that once swore loyalty to the Sultan now opened their gates to the Mongols, begging for mercy. Some were spared, others were leveled. Genghis had made a promise: I will show them the price of broken trust. And he kept that promise city by city. Historians still debate this campaign. Was it overkill? Was it genocide? Or was it calculated justice, a violent but proportional response to the slaughter of envoys? The truth may be somewhere in between. Genghis Khan believed in law, but he also believed in fear, and in this campaign they became the same thing. But the worst was still to come. In Nishapur, a new wound would be opened, one that pierced deeper than any blade, not for land, not for politics, but for revenge. And this time, it would be personal. Nishapur, a city of poetry, of turquoise domes, of scholars and saints. Before the Mongols came, its streets were filled with merchants and artists. Children learned calligraphy in shaded courtyards. Sufi mystics walked barefoot through jasmine-scented gardens. But when Genghis Khan heard what had happened there, the scent in the air would turn to blood, because what happened at Nishapur was not conquest, it was vengeance. In early 1221, Genghis Khan's forces were tightening their grip on Persia. But while armies marched and cities burned, one man was left to govern a newly conquered region near Nishapur. Turgochi, Genghis Khan's beloved son-in-law, married to his favorite daughter. He wasn't just family, he was trusted, respected, loyal. So when rebels in Nishapur staged an uprising and killed Turgochi, they didn't just strike a soldier, they struck the Khan's blood. The Mongol army arrived outside Nishapur with fire in their eyes. Led by Temüjin, Genghis's youngest son, the soldiers didn't pause to negotiate. There were no envoys, no warnings, no offers of mercy. This was not policy. This was personal. The walls fell quickly. Inside, chaos. The rebels who had once celebrated Turgochi's death tried to flee, but it was too late. Everyone inside the city would pay the price. Chroniclers tell different versions of what happened next. Some say 70,000 were killed. Others say 100,000. A few claim over 1 million. Were these numbers exaggerated? Probably, but the truth is still horrifying. Genghis Khan ordered that every man, woman, and child in the city be killed. And not just killed, systematically executed. Bodies were piled like firewood. Heads stacked in pyramids outside the ruined gates. Blood soaked the gardens where poets once walked. According to Persian accounts, it was Genghis Khan's daughter, the widow of Turgochi, who demanded no survivors. She didn't cry. She didn't faint. She stood before Temüjin and said, "Let no soul walk out of that city alive." And her father obeyed. For one of the few times in his life, Genghis Khan let emotion lead the sword. And the result was genocide. After the slaughter, the Mongols burned the libraries, tore down the minarets. Even the water canals were filled with corpses. Nishapur wasn't just defeated, it was erased. For centuries after, poets would weep for it. Sufis would call it the bleeding heart of Persia, and travelers would pass by its ruins in silence, never speaking the name aloud, as if the ghosts might still be listening. It's said that some commanders begged for the killing to stop. One of them, an old general named Jebe, turned away as prisoners were lined up. But Genghis Khan stood firm. "You do not kill a man," he said, "and expect his blood to vanish." This was not revenge by half. It was ritual, a warning carved in flesh. What makes Nishapur so chilling is that it doesn't match the cold logic of most Mongol campaigns. This wasn't about strategy, or territory, or politics. It was about grief. It showed a side of Genghis Khan that the world rarely saw. a man who could love deeply and destroy completely when that love was torn away. He was not a beast, wrote one scholar, but he became one when you hurt what he loved. When the fires died down, the Mongols moved on. They left behind only rubble, but something else lingered too: fear. Not just of Genghis Khan's armies, but of what he might do next, if provoked. Centuries later, when Tamerlane, another Central Asian conqueror, visited the ruins of Nishapur, he ordered his men to build a tower of skulls. He did it, he said, to honor Genghis Khan, to remind the world. This is what happens when you make war with the horsemen of the steppe. Even in death, the Khan's shadow stretched across generations. But the campaign wasn't finished. Sultan Muhammad still lived, running, hiding, starving. And Genghis Khan had not forgotten. The messenger had been murdered. The cities had been erased. But the man behind it all was still breathing. Not for long. When the walls of Samarkand fell, the Khwarezmian Empire began to die. Not with a scream, but a slow, bleeding crawl. Muhammad II, the sultan who had dared to insult Genghis Khan, was no longer a ruler. He was a fugitive. The man who once commanded vast cities, scholars, and armies, now struggled just to keep his robes clean as he fled from fortress to fortress, hunted like an animal through his own crumbling kingdom. What followed was not a chase. It was an unraveling. The Mongols didn't just pursue him, they infected his empire with fear. Everywhere the Sultan went, the ground beneath his feet seemed to dissolve. Governors refused to open their gates. Armies melted away before they could be mustered. The same men who once bowed to his throne now looked to the east and whispered one name under their breath: Genghis. He had become a ghost. Ever approaching, never seen, yet always felt. The people began to believe that to protect the Sultan was to invite annihilation. So they turned away, city after city, and Muhammad ran. He fled first to Nishapur, then to Qazvin. In each place, he hoped for safety, for one last spark of loyalty. In each place, he found silence or treachery. The Mongol army, meanwhile, had split like a net. Subutai and Jebe, two of Genghis's deadliest commanders, had been given a singular mission: find the Sultan. End the story. They didn't burn cities along the way. They didn't stop to pillage or conquer. They chased, and slowly, ruthlessly, they closed the noose. It was winter now. The roads were mud, then ice. Mountains rose like walls. The Caspian Sea loomed dark and unwelcoming. Muhammad had only his son, Jalal ad-Din, and a handful of loyal guards left. He was no longer dressed in royal finery, but in the rough garments of a man trying to disappear. His health deteriorated. The cold bit at his bones. The shame hollowed him out. He had gone from emperor to exile. And still, the Mongols came. By the time he reached a remote island in the Caspian, he was a ghost of a man. Sick, shivering, alone. It was there, far from the palaces of his youth, far from the scholars and servants who once surrounded him, that Sultan Muhammad II died. Some say it was pneumonia, others say dysentery. Still others claim it was despair that finally broke him. But one thing is certain: Genghis Khan never laid eyes on him, and yet he had killed him just the same. The Mongols, when they learned of his death, did not rejoice. There was no triumph, no songs. Genghis had wanted more than a corpse. He had wanted an ending. He had wanted the world to see what happened when kings murdered messengers. And now that warning had no theater. So instead, he turned to the one thing that could outlive any man: memory. He ordered that every remaining stronghold of the Khwarezmian Empire be reduced. Not simply defeated, erased. If a city had resisted, it was destroyed. If a governor had been loyal to the Sultan, they were executed. Entire garrisons were annihilated. Villages emptied, wells poisoned, fields salted. But not all were punished equally. Some cities that had opened their gates without resistance were spared. Their people lived. Trade resumed, because Genghis Khan was not mindless in his wrath. He was deliberate, calculated. He wanted the survivors to spread the tale. He wanted the world to remember that Mongol peace was possible, but Mongol justice was eternal. Yet from this fire, one figure emerged, a shadow of the fallen sultan, but with fire in his heart. His son, Jalal ad-Din, a young man with his father's pride, but perhaps not his blindness. Jalal had escaped the slaughter. With a small army, he began rallying the remnants of the Khwarezmian forces. He crossed mountains, gathered fugitives, forged desperate alliances, and unlike his father, Jalal fought back. He struck at Mongol scouting parties, won a few scattered victories, made them bleed. He was not a ruler. He was a flame, brief, erratic, but impossible to ignore. Genghis Khan watched him closely. He respected resistance, especially when it came with strategy, courage, but he also knew what fire becomes when surrounded by wind. Eventually, it goes out. The tale of Jalal ad-Din would stretch beyond this chapter, but for now, Genghis Khan had done what he came to do. He had punished a king not by killing him, but by killing everything he built. He had turned a proud empire into a cautionary tale, and he had rewritten the rules of diplomacy forever. From now on, when a Mongol messenger arrived at your gates, you answered carefully, because the man who sent them was not far behind. Genghis Khan had destroyed the Khwarezmian heartland, but now the rivers of Persia would run with new blood. The Mongols were not finished. The walls of Nishapur trembled with each impact. Thunder echoed not from the skies, but from the steady pounding of siege engines outside its gates. Smoke coiled up from villages beyond the hills, a signal the storm had arrived. The Mongols were no longer just coming. They were here. Nishapur had always been proud, a jewel of learning, poetry, and art. Its people considered themselves part of a legacy, one that went back centuries, through dynasties and empires. But pride was no shield, and poetry could not stop a battering ram. Inside the city, fear had spread like plague. Food was running low. Whispers traveled through the narrow streets. Stories of Samarkand, of Bokhara, of Otrar, cities that no longer existed. Rumors said the Mongols left no survivors, that they salted the land, that even the bones of the dead were crushed to dust. But for Nishapur, there was something more personal. To them, this war wasn't just military. It was vengeance, because a man named Temüjin had died here. Temüjin wasn't just any Mongol commander. He was part of the royal family, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, married to his beloved daughter. A fierce and respected leader, Temüjin had led the siege on Nishapur, confident it would fall like the others. But a stray arrow, some say fired from a rooftop by a hidden archer, pierced his neck. He died within hours. His men, stunned, fell back. The defenders cheered. A minor victory, but it wouldn't last, because news of Temüjin's death traveled quickly. And it didn't just reach the ears of Genghis Khan. It reached his daughter. Her name is lost to history, but her fury is not. She demanded retribution, not just victory, an example, a warning. She didn't want the city taken. She wanted it erased. Genghis, known for cold calculation, agreed, and so the second siege began. This time, there were no demands for surrender, no envoys, no negotiations, only fire and steel. The Mongols surrounded Nishapur completely, cutting off every road, every water source, every hope. Days bled into nights. The battering rams never stopped. Then, on the 10th day, a section of the eastern wall cracked. Just enough. They poured in. The defenders fought savagely with spears, knives, boiling oil. Women joined the battle, hurling stones from rooftops. But it wasn't enough. The city fell. What followed, even by Mongol standards, was horror. Every man, woman, and child was executed. Some say 100,000. Some say 200,000. The numbers don't agree. But the scale is not disputed. It was methodical, cold, measured. Entire streets lined with heads. Blood ran through the alleyways like rainwater in spring. Some were buried alive. Some scholars were burned with their libraries. The graves could not be dug fast enough, and the stench of death clung to the soil for years after. Why? because this was personal. Because Genghis Khan had lost a son-in-law, and his daughter had lost a husband, and now chpater had lost everything. Further west, the city of Herat watched in dread. They had resisted Mongol envoys once. Now they opened their gates. Some cities tried to surrender in advance to send tribute to plead mercy. But it didn't matter anymore. This was not about resistance or diplomacy. The Khwarezmian Empire was being unmade. One by one, cities vanished. Populations were displaced. Markets emptied. Entire lineages disappeared. The Sultan, still on the run. Sultan Muhammad had split from his son, Jalal al-Din, and was fleeing west, deeper into the mountains, trying to outrun death itself. But there was nowhere left to go. The Mongols had unleashed a second wave. Not soldiers this time, but administrators, census takers, tax collectors. New laws were declared in every conquered city. And unlike other conquerors, the Mongols didn't just burn what they hated. They often spared scholars, doctors, engineers, even artists, if they were useful. But if you resisted, your city was erased from memory. And so, in a span of less than 2 years, the once mighty Khwarezmian Empire had collapsed. Otrar, Bokhara, Samarkand, Merv, chpater, they weren't just defeated, they were gone. Dust, broken stone. And still, the Mongol army rode west. Still, they chased the Sultan, because Genghis Khan wasn't done. Not yet. In the west, the Caspian Sea shimmered. Beyond it lay new lands, new cultures, new empires. But for now, Genghis Khan had one mission: find the Sultan and finish what was started. The rivers behind them ran red, but the next river would drown a king. The Sultan has vanished into the mountains, but he can't hide forever. And Genghis Khan, he didn't come this far to be ignored. Next, the final reckoning. The Sultan was running out of world. From palace to port, from mountain to mountain, Muhammad II of Khwarezm was no longer an emperor. He was a fugitive. Once a man who ruled an empire from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf. Now he was a ghost, dragging a broken crown across the cold spines of the Caspian. Everywhere he went, Genghis Khan was already there or coming. The Sultan had split his army, sent his son, Jalal al-Din, south with what remained of their strength. He trusted the mountains to protect him, trusted the loyalty of distant governors, trusted fate, but trust had already betrayed him. The Mongols moved like smoke. One day, a city thought itself safe. The next, its walls crumbled and its people vanished. And still, they hunted the Sultan. Genghis had sent his most ruthless commanders, Subutai and Jebe, with one order: find him. They rode with less than 30,000 men, but they were a blade drawn through silk. They didn't move like an army. They moved like shadows, quiet, precise, relentless, through the snowy mountain passes of Persia, across frozen rivers and barren valleys. They chased him. The Sultan fled from castle to castle, changing names, disguising his identity. In one city, he shaved his beard. In another, he hid among peasants. But every day he woke up, the Mongols were closer. At last, somewhere near the shores of the Caspian Sea, his body gave out, sick with fever, weak from hunger, surrounded by only a handful of loyal guards. He died not on a battlefield, not with a sword in his hand, but alone, on a rocky island, exiled from the empire he once ruled. No one mourned him. No songs were sung. There was no funeral, no tomb, no statue, just the cold wind and the waves of a sea that didn't care. That was the end of the Sultan of Khwarezm. But not the end of resistance, because Jalal al-Din, the Sultan's son, still lived. And unlike his father, Jalal al-Din wasn't running. He was preparing to fight. South of the Hindu Kush, near the Indus River, he gathered what remained of the Khwarezmian army, veterans, deserters, broken commanders, all drawn to the last banner still flying. The Mongols followed, but this time, they found something they hadn't seen before: a worthy opponent. The Battle of the Indus was chaos. Jalal al-Din's men fought like they had nothing left to lose. And they didn't. Horses crashed into cavalry, swords against spears. Blood soaked the banks of the Indus River. At one point, Jalal al-Din himself broke through the Mongol lines, leading a cavalry charge that nearly reached Genghis Khan's own command post. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The Mongols encircled them, cut down the last of the resistance. Bodies piled high on the riverbanks. As the battle ended, Genghis Khan watched from a ridge, and then, across the river, he saw something impossible. Jalal al-Din, still alive, bleeding, exhausted, but not broken. He rode his horse to the edge of the river, turned, and looked back straight at Genghis Khan. And then he leapt. His horse landed in the river. The current dragged them both under. The Mongols shouted, trying to follow, but it was too late. Jalal al-Din disappeared into the water and lived. He crossed into India, escaped. Even Genghis Khan, cold, calculating, undefeated, is said to have smiled. "Such a son should have been mine," he muttered. With that, the Khwarezmian campaign ended. The Mongols had done the impossible, crossed an entire continent, toppled an empire, burned its cities to the ground, rewritten maps, and left behind a silence so deep it echoed for generations. But Genghis Khan wasn't finished, because beyond the Indus lay India, and to the east the Jin dynasty still stood, and to the west, the cities of the Caucasus and Europe. The Mongol war machine had tasted the edge of the world, and it wanted more. Back in Mongolia, the campfires burned. Victorious generals returned. Spoils piled high. Songs were sung. But something had changed. This wasn't just conquest. This was a philosophy, a system, where loyalty mattered more than blood, where order was built from destruction, where the Khan ruled not just through fear but through belief. The Mongol Empire was no longer an idea. It was a reality. But beneath it all, something else stirred. Genghis Khan was older now, wiser, and maybe more mortal than before. He had avenged the death of his messengers. He had punished betrayal with fire. He had erased an empire. But empires do not rest, and the world still had more to give, or more to lose. No man could kill him, but fate doesn't need a sword. The final ride of Genghis Khan, his last campaign, his legacy, and the mystery that still haunts the world. Where does a god die? By the 1220s, Genghis Khan was more than a conqueror, he was a living myth. But myths, like men, bleed. In the twilight of his reign, he turned his eyes east once more, back to China, to the kingdom of the Xia, who had dared to defy him one last time. Xia had broken their oath. While Genghis fought in the west, they had withheld troops, questioned orders, and dared to test the limits of his patience. That was a mistake. The old wolf sharpened his claws. With winter approaching, Genghis gathered his most loyal generals and sons. He would not leave rebellion unpunished. This time, he would end Xia for good. And so, the last great campaign began not for territory, but for legacy, because the Khan knew time was running out. The Mongol war machine moved with practiced brutality. Towns surrendered and were spared. Cities resisted and were wiped from the earth. Xia's once proud defenses crumbled under the storm. Arrows fell like rain. Siege engines thundered. The steppe swallowed resistance. It was not a war. It was a cleansing. And behind it all, still in the saddle, now gray with age, rode the Khan. He no longer needed to shout commands. A glance, a nod, a signal in the wind. His army moved like his shadow. But something was changing. Some said the Khan rode slower. His eyes stayed longer on the horizon. And at night, he whispered names of the dead. The exact moment it happened is still debated. A fall from his horse, a hunting accident, a wound that refused to heal. Others say it wasn't injury, but illness. Some whispered darker tales, that he was assassinated by a captive princess, that poison passed silently through his veins, that fate had simply claimed its debt. What we do know is this: Genghis Khan kept riding. He did not speak of pain. He gave no sign of fear. Even as his flesh weakened, his will only sharpened. The great wolf was dying, but he would not die kneeling. He would die as he had lived, on campaign, with fire behind him and empire ahead. When the Xia capital fell, the Khan did not celebrate. He lay in silence. His generals approached, waiting for his command. But the tent remained still. Sometime in August 1227, just weeks before the final surrender, Genghis Khan died. No drums, no last roar, just stillness. But the world would not be allowed to mourn. Not yet. The Khan had left orders. Keep my death a secret. If the army knew, if enemies learned, the empire could splinter. So his death became a shadow. His body quietly transported back across the steppe. And around his corpse, a ring of silence. The funeral of Genghis Khan is one of the most guarded mysteries in all of history. No monuments, no tombstones, no temple of gold. Only legend. Some say his escort killed every man, woman, and child they passed to keep the location secret. Others say rivers were diverted to hide the grave, that his horse was buried beside him, that the forest swallowed the path forever. To this day, no one knows where he lies. His grave is unmarked, but his shadow remains. In every law, in every soldier's oath, in every border that still bears his name. With the Khan gone, the world held its breath. But Genghis had prepared. Years before, he had chosen his successor, not his eldest, but his most dependable, Ogidi, a man of moderation, of diplomacy, and most importantly, of loyalty. Genghis didn't trust genius. He trusted reliability. Ogidi was crowned as the next great Khan. The generals knelt. The banners bowed. The empire breathed again. And with Ogidi's rise, the Mongol war machine didn't slow. It grew. For Genghis hadn't just built an empire. He had built a system capable of lasting without him. The man was gone, but the storm he unleashed had just begun. By the time of his death, Genghis Khan had conquered more land than any man in history. More than Alexander. More than Napoleon. From Korea to the Caspian Sea, the world knew one truth. If you hear hooves in the night, it's already too late. He wasn't born in a palace. He didn't wear a crown, but his laws, his armies, and his legacy redrew the map of the earth. And though the man died, the myth did not. What Genghis Khan left behind wasn't just an empire, but a trail of mysteries buried in silence. The wind howls across a cold mountain pass. Fog clings to jagged stones. Below, a river twists like a vein through the land. Somewhere here, they say, lies the body of a god. We know how he lived, but not where he lies. Temüjin, the man who became Genghis Khan, carved his name into the bones of continents. Yet no one knows where he rests. No tomb, no monument, no trace. And that was the point. Some say he planned it that way, to vanish as he came like a storm over the steppe. Others believe it was a curse, a price paid for the blood he spilled. Either way, the greatest mystery of Genghis Khan isn't how he conquered the world. It's how he disappeared from it. He died in 1227. That much we know. But how? The official record is vague, and that's by design. Some claim he fell from his horse during a hunt and succumbed to his injuries. Others whisper that a captured Tangut princess smuggled a blade into his tent and slit his groin in revenge. There's even a darker rumor that someone close to him poisoned him, tired of conquest. But the truth is, no one saw him die. When he fell ill, the news was buried. His generals were ordered to keep it secret. His army kept marching. Cities were burned. Orders were given in his name. Even in death, Genghis Khan remained in control. When he finally died, the world was never told. Not yet. His funeral was not a ceremony. It was a military operation. 800 horsemen were assigned to escort the body. According to legend, every traveler they passed on the way was killed. Some say they even diverted a river to conceal the grave. Others say a forest was planted over the site, and when the riders finished their task, they were executed too, to preserve the secret. No one was meant to find him. Why? Because the Mongols believed the dead had power, that a grave could become a shrine, and shrines attract enemies. To protect his legacy, his body had to vanish. The man who reshaped the earth wanted the earth to keep his secret. For centuries, no one dared to look. But in the 20th century, Soviet archaeologists tried. They searched the Temüjin mountains. They studied maps, dug trenches, followed rumors. Every expedition failed. Equipment broke. Storms struck. People died. Some called it superstition, others a curse. In modern times, satellite imaging revealed anomalies near Burkhan Khaldun, a sacred mountain tied to Genghis's youth. But the Mongolian government banned all digging. They believe the tomb should remain untouched. If his grave is found, the empire falls again, some say. Is it fear or respect? Either way, the silence holds. But perhaps the most enduring secret is not where he lies, but who still carries his blood. Genghis Khan had many wives, many sons. We know the names of a few: Joki, Chagatai, Ogidi Talyui. But what about the others? Some believe he fathered hundreds of children across the steppe, kept secret to protect them, or to plant his legacy in the shadows. In 2003, a genetic study found something extraordinary. Nearly 1 in every 200 men alive today carry a Y chromosome traceable to one man in Mongolia, living 800 years ago. Genghis Khan's DNA may still be moving through the world, through markets, parliaments, cities. How many bear his blood without knowing? And if someone claimed his name today, who could deny them? He was no priest. He burned temples, beheaded scholars, mocked kings who ruled by divine right. And yet he prayed to the eternal blue sky, to his ancestors, to the spirits of the steppe. He claimed destiny, that heaven had chosen him. And when he won, he saw it as proof. He let conquered peoples keep their faiths. He even studied them, adopted their ideas. But always he returned to the sky. Not a god he saw, but a force he felt. Some call him a brutal pragmatist, others a spiritual visionary. But maybe he simply believed in momentum, that the steppe gave, and the steppe could take. And his only commandment was, never stop. He ruled the largest land empire in history, yet left behind no palace, no pyramid, no tomb, only stories. He conquered nations, then erased his own shadow. The man who united tribes, toppled dynasties, and shattered borders, vanished. No trace, no grave, just wind, stories, and silence. His body may be lost, but his empire still breathes. In the final chapter, we explore what Genghis Khan truly left behind. Not just a line in history, but a blueprint for power. He died in silence. He left no tomb, no grand mausoleum, no last words carved in stone. And yet, the wind still carries his name, across Mongolia, across China, across the bones of 100 cities he burned. He did not just conquer land, he conquered memory. At its height, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, from Korea to the Caspian Sea, from Siberia to the gates of Baghdad. It stretched farther than Rome, rose faster than Alexander's, and collapsed harder than Napoleon's. It was not built in courts, but on horseback. The empire Genghis Khan forged out of tribal hatred, vendetta, and wind became a machine of law, order, and terrifying logic. Yasa, his code, enforced unity. Messengers could travel thousands of miles untouched. Thieves were executed. Soldiers were rotated. Religious tolerance was law. It was brutal, efficient, unrelenting, and strangely ahead of its time. Genghis left behind not just a legend, but a dynasty. His sons and grandsons would become emperors of empires he never lived to see. Ogdi, his third son, ruled as Great Khan and expanded the empire into Eastern Europe. Mongke, his grandson, struck deeper into China and the Middle East. And Kublai Khan, the most famous of all, created the Yuan dynasty in China, ruling from Beijing as emperor of an ancient civilization his grandfather once merely raided. His blood now sat on thrones. His name whispered in fear and awe across continents. The Mongols reshaped the world, not just through conquest, but through connection. They reopened the Silk Road. They linked Europe and Asia. They moved goods, ideas, even diseases, faster than any empire before them. Some say the Mongols brought the Black Death to Europe. Others say they brought paper, trade, and tolerance. Maybe they brought both. Even long after the empire splintered, it cast a long shadow. Islamic scholars wrote of the Mongol terror as a divine punishment. Chinese historians recorded their rule as both foreign and inevitable. European crusaders, once terrified of them, later tried to ally with the Mongols against Muslim kingdoms. Genghis Khan became a ghost in history, sometimes hero, sometimes devil. In Persia, he was remembered as the scourge of God. In China, his descendants became emperors. In Russia, his name lingered as a threat. And in Europe, he was a whisper, then a legend, then a mystery. The world forgot the man, but it could never forget the storm he left behind. Today, Genghis Khan is gone, and yet he remains. Modern geneticists found something strange. Pattern. A single male chromosome, shared by roughly 1 in 200 men alive today, especially in Central Asia, especially near Mongolia. One lineage, one man, a ghost in the blood. They call it the Genghis gene. His sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons fathered children across kingdoms and continents. He didn't just conquer cities. He seeded dynasties. His legacy is not just in stone or stories, but in skin and blood. So what was he? A unifier? A tyrant? A god of war? A servant of destiny? It depends who you ask. In Mongolia, he is a founding father, the face on currency, a name carved into the land. In China, a foreign emperor, both feared and respected. In the West, he is sometimes mythologized, sometimes villainized, rarely understood. He murdered millions. He spared artists. He burned libraries. He tolerated priests. He prayed. He pillaged. He ruled. Was he evil? Or was he what history demanded? A mirror to mankind's worst and greatest instincts. Perhaps that's why he left no grave. Because how do you bury a force of nature? Today, roads trace the old Mongol paths. Markets echo with the rhythms of ancient caravans. Laws, like passport systems and religious freedom, have Mongol roots. Even modern warfare owes some of its strategies to the Mongols. Feigned retreats, spy networks, psychological warfare. But above all, his greatest legacy is the question he left behind. Can unity be forged from fear? Can order rise from ashes? Genghis Khan did it, and for a brief, brutal, beautiful moment, the world moved to his rhythm. He changed the earth, and then disappeared into it. No tomb, no body, no final resting place. The man who created the largest empire in history left without a trace. Just a name, just a shadow, just the bones of nations whispering. He was here,